not winning 90% of your new business because you have some sort of incredible value.
I'm going to take a bit of a different angle.
I've got a budget this big. I'm going to give it to you because you have a really killer plan.
You give a Red Bull to a turtle, what do you expect?
I think that's a dead turtle. So let's move on to...
E-Rig.
Cheers.
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 Does your current premium finance company lock you into long-term agreements? That's because they don't want you talking to us. At IFS, we win your business the good old-fashioned way, with customer service. I know you don't always have to use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Insurance Pint Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Reed, and as always, I'm joined by my colleagues, Steve Earle, CEO of Cheap Insurance.
Hello.
Adam Mitchell, aka the Pretty One, CEO of Mitch Insurance.
How come you always get to be the host?
Because that's what it says on the software. You're a participant and I'm the host. And soon to join us, not yet present, is Jeff Roy, CEO of Excalibur Insurance, who no doubt will bust the door down like Kramer and join us forthwith.
Always on time, Captain Punctual. Boom. He's not there.
No,
It was worth a try.
He didn't get his cue. Oh, well.
Sorry, Jerry. Trying to close one of those eDocs. How's that?
That's good.
Nice.
To make the cut.
Okay. Today we're going to talk eDocs and EDI, old tech. We generally talk about newer tech, but we're going to talk a little about old tech because it is and has been a bit of an issue. So we're going to talk about these two older pieces of technology and how they benefit or don't benefit brokers, and what can be done to swing the needle more firmly into the benefit side of the chart. So Steve is a member of the CSIO board, and I'm just going to get him to start us off by explaining, for those folks who don't know, which hopefully is very few, what's an eDoc.
Isn't it just the industry felt obliged to rename a PDF? PDF wasn't cool enough. We got to come up with our own name.
Yeah. An eDoc is essentially exactly what Adam said, a PDF that gets delivered to the broker management system from the carrier.
Okay, so so it's a digital piece of paper, right? So it's not data. We're replacing the carrier pigeon ICS version of the physical piece of paper with an electronic PDF that we call an eDoc.
That's right. So instead of getting it in the courier, you now get it in your BMS one way or another.
So Adam, Jeff, which one do you want to talk about what the benefits of eDocs are? Maybe both of you. Maybe you can take a stab at it, and one can follow, the other can lead. Who wants to go first?
Where do you start and stop on the benefits of electronic document? It's like, it's instant, it's cost-free. You can have umpteen infinite sizes for little to no cost of storage. You can fire them instantly across the country and the world. We can track all the changes via the red line. Like, they're searchable. Where do we stop on, this can't even be a debate.
So what's the fly in the ointment here? What's not working correctly?
My broker lizard brain Cole's Notes version is they came up with a bunch of standards at CSIO for sending the documents, and nobody at the company's either smart enough, takes the time to do anything, or really cares about using the right segmentation for sending those documents. They call everything, for instance, a memo, when it's not really a memo. It could be a renewal, it could be a change, it could be an endorsement. There's a number of codes that have been done. I believe there is an eDoc certification, and I don't know how anybody's ever passed it, because what's being sent by the companies to us is kind of a hodgepodge of stuff, and our staff is being then entrusted to close duplicate activities, rename stuff. So some of the benefits of eDocs are great and proven to the company, but the way they're being delivered, they're not following the proper standards, which has caused a ton of cash and time onto brokers, making us have to look for alternative solutions like robotic process automation or virtual assistants, or either staff doing it to make sure they're labeled properly.
So let me read that back to you. So, in the old paper days, you had documents that came in. Somebody, receptionist or mailroom person or whatever, would look at them and say, "Oh, this is a new business policy, this is a billing statement, this is a cancellation, this is whatever, and they would file them appropriately. So now you get electronic paper coming in, and it should be coded, stamped, coded with those appropriate transactions so your VMS can slot it appropriately, but it's not. Right? A lot of them are, into memo, which is, basically other. And there's something like, if memory serves, 50 different transactions, and I believe about 4 of them are being used, quite regularly instead of all 50. So obviously they're going into the wrong slots, they're going into a general slot, and now again somebody has to, open the mail, in this case a PDF, look at it, take action on it, et cetera.
That's a great Cole's Notes. And we have some carriers that they're sending the renewals in 3 documents. They give you the application, they gave you the payment schedule, they gave you the auto ID or the liability cards all separate. They're using the same code for all 3 of those transactions.
I mean, Steve and Adam, what other ways are brokers responding to this? What other ways are there to manage the situation on your end?
Throw bodies at it. That's all there is. Either you're going to use a bot or you're going to use a body.
Steve, what's your take? Like you've got some estimates working at it. What do you think it's costing the industry? Like we did some calculations and stuff. What's your layman's term? Right?
It's certainly over 10 million and could be as much as 20.
Like you can kind of imagine it like an oil leak. Like there's no good thing about it, and you could contain it and like manage the spill, but you're having to burn assets, and we're doing it on behalf of the sender, because as the recipient with the backcatcher's glove, you're not changing what's coming down, but we just got to continually clean up the mess. We can pay and contract and automate robots to do it, or we can just get back to actually sending it properly.
The benefit of fixing this is 10 to 20 million, from Steve's perspective, and that. So another way of looking at it is that the industry broker channel has been spending 10 to 20 million for the last few years because it's broken, because it's spilling oil in Adam's with Adam's analogy.
That's 20 that's not being put to any part of the mutual benefit of the relationship.
No, it's 20 million burnt.
So in the concept of like, I could be in marketing, I could be trying to grow, I could be trying to acquire, I could be shoring up other like intelligent investments.
The opportunity cost is huge, right? That money could be reinvested and get so much better return.
I just did some rough math. It's approximately 2% of my workforce just on eDocs right now.
What's an average cost of acquisition? For a personal lines new business policy?
Depends. What are you including in that cost? Are you costing the marketing cost? Like you're probably looking at 150 to 250 acquisition cost, not counting your overhead and staff.
I'm going to use 200. So that's 20 million. That means 100 that you could have got 100,000 new policies on the broker channel. What's now? I'm gonna go just for the hell of it with 1,000 average premium. So that's $100 million of premium that would have flowed to the broker channel.
And here's the other flip side, Tom. So we read a bucket load of new business. 60% of that business comes from direct writers. That's not just even if somebody's going to make the argument, oh, it's just going to be sloshing around or whatever. It's like, no, you could be winning part of that back, like a healthy chunk of that back.
Well, let's stop there, though. Let's say not only new business, what about retention? If you took the time and those people made protection reviews and provided better service to the client, they could actually do more shopping. You could retain stuff. And, 1% retention, they say that can go to as much as 5 to 10% improvement on EBITDA by improving 1% retention, right?
So what's the solution, guys? I don't know. Actually, maybe Steve, I'll throw this to you for a second, because I know there's been some work from the CSIO perspective to fix up the standards. So there's kind of 2 issues here, right? There's the standards aren't exactly as robust as they could be, and the implementation of said standards in many cases hasn't been as good as it should be.
Well, we'll start with the standards piece. So if you're driving on the highway and the speed limit sign just says speed limit with no number, or speed limit 0 to 100, how do people interpret that? We've got a sign. So when people are driving all different speeds, we can't really get upset. So historically, the mandate of CSIO has been the creator of standards, but not the governor of standards. So in the last, I'll say year and a half, with the new strategic plan at CSIO, governance, quote unquote, has become part of the mandate. So there's actually a ton of work going on right now at CSIO insofar as, number one, the first thing is you got to make sure that there can be no interpretation of standards that differs from one insurer to another. They have to be very, very clear. So when an infrastructure person is going to they want to send one of those PDFs to a broker, they have to compartmentalize it and say, what is this? And okay, it's this type of document. It meets this code. So that's the code I'm going to use. That's got to get all cleaned up first because it's a little bit ambiguous. So CSIO is going through a process. They have working committees, and there has been the formation of what's going to be called the CSIO Governance Advisory Council, which has a charter and a mandate that I have seen, but it hasn't been ratified by the board yet, so I can't talk too much about it. But I would say I like it from what I see so far. So once you clean up you actually put a number on that sign on the highway, then you can, not perhaps give people tickets or identify you were not going X speed. You were below or you're above. You have to have that clear identifier. So that's what's going on right now. And then you got to work with the suppliers of those PDFs who are sending them to us to make sure that they're following those unambiguous codes.
Yeah, I think that's good to get rid of the artistic merit from the Russian judge in the figure skating called eDocs, because it was just not working out, right? Like,
Steve, what's your comfort level that once CSIO has got the standards up to snuff, that the carriers will go back and rework the programming that they've got in place to actually make this happen?
I can tell you, all the carriers that are represented at the board are engaged. I don't know. Are you asking me based on past experience of insurance companies come through on devoting resources to tech that's going to help us? I'm a little jaded, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it might not actually be such a big chore over there, and they will see the benefits to the broker side. Change this PDF to this code instead of that one, please. It could come down to that, right?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of carriers with a lot of systems out there, so some will find it easy and some will find it hard and some will find it somewhere in the middle. Is my take on it. But I guess I wasn't looking so much from the historical perspective because the answer there might be a little bit depressing. But I was looking more for because you've been in the room with the carriers who sit on the CSIO board, and you've looked in their face to see what kind of reactions they're giving, and I was looking more for that kind of feedback.
Well, we have this governance advisory council consists of carriers, but brokers are represented as well as vendors. So you've got all the stakeholders engaged in getting this across the line. It's not going to be a tomorrow thing, but there's a hell of a lot of activity going on about it right now, and really, it's just come to the surface in the last 6 or 8 months.
I was going to throw this question back at Tom. What do you think the company management systems, like the Guidewires of the world, what kind of role do you think they should play in this, Tom? I'd like to get your perspective from a company side, because shouldn't some of this stuff be working out of the box? Everybody's buying the same stuff over and over again. This should be baked right into it. Why do people even have to think about this, right?
I'll try to answer your question as best I can. So if I'm Guidewire, okay, I'll pick on them. I'm a global, I have a global code base, which is to a certain extent modified for each country, but I want to keep that modification to the least amount possible because I want to upgrade and change stuff. And it's hard if you got 15 different or more iterations of it. So eDocs is, it's a Canadian specific thing. So if I was them, I'd put sort of the framework in place for this, but I wouldn't necessarily hard code these codes, so to speak. Now, when I look at the systems integrators who are actually implementing Guidewire for the various carriers, two of the key ones are Deloitte and EY. Those are the guys that I think should have this stuff baked into their implementation of these systems. They should have this stuff baked. They should offer it as a service, right? So just like your broker codes and commissions and rating services and all these underwriting authorities and all these different kind of things, eDocs is a part of the fabric of how brokers and carriers work together, and that should be absolutely hard coded. So I wouldn't point the finger at Guidewire per se, although Guidewire needs to make sure that the framework exists. I would point the finger directly at EY, Deloitte, and whatever other third-party SI is out there actually implementing this stuff, and say they should have it, right? Because from one customer to the next. It's exactly the same. And they can sell it as a service. They can license it and say, hey, you want to get your own guy to do this? Great. But by the way, we sell this. It's either part of our package or an add-on service, whatever. And it's the same. It's the same from this company to that company. And I think that's where you'd make a ton of traction.
Bingo, because there's I won't mention any companies, but there's companies that went in Guidewire that everything's a wild, wild west and interpreted things differently. I'd allegedly got some brokers to sit down and review this stuff. I'd like to see some of the brokers on the panel because what came out could have been stopped. I tried to stop some of this stuff 5 years ago to get back to the coding, and I basically got brushed off. It wasn't a priority, right? So it's glad to see that this is an industry issue. People are going to find the time for it, and it's on everybody's radar. So
who's the customer for Deloitte or E&Y?
Insurance company.
So what do they give a shit about distribution? That's honestly, like, what is the experience of distribution as part of their overall offering? And it's, to me, at least I haven't seen any kind of evidence that would suggest that they're engaged. Otherwise, it would be this is the broker experience that we deliver on the other side of this. We'll customize it all for you and what you want to do, but when it's being pushed out to the experience on the other side of this is what it looks like, so it's consistent. If there's 8 Guidewire companies, it should look the same way at all 8.
How do we go the other way? How do we reward the companies that go and fix it? How do we applaud the ones that are getting it right? How do we stand them up?
They will win, Adam. They're going to see it in when you're a more efficient insurer to deal with, you're going to get more market share out of brokers. It's going to be simple as that. When a transaction takes 15 minutes with one and 2 minutes with another, business will migrate to that 2 minutes. I mean, there is, a high watermark.
So I tell you what, let's switch over to the EDI conversation because it's a similar conversation with a different technology. So Adam, I'm going to get you to start. I mean, I'll get you to talk about, give us a quick overview of EDI. Unlike eDocs, if anybody doesn't know about EDI, I'm going to be shocked. But maybe just give us a quick intro, EDI, and sort of 30,000 foot level. What's the problem?
EDI. Every day you get a download. Every day it's an AL3 file. You got to merge and go pick it up from a digital mailbox and stuff it back into your system that has mapping. Nobody has run it to the exact same standards, following the exact same format. So it's a dog's breakfast as who has gone in, wrote the manuscript to transcribe and decode. Company A sends it XYZ. Company B sends it LMNOP. Company C sends it a different format, all for the same field. They tend to seem to have hidden things in different codes and ways to possibly protect some competitive angle, or who knows what the excuse is holds water. But inside that, we get all of our accounting transactions, all of our coverage limits, all of our renewal and endorsement changes onto accounting lines in the Excel format. So the problem I have with it is it comes from an era of time. It should have now evolved into an API to be running real-time information up and down to the companies, as opposed to we send a request, next day it gets processed and sent back down to our mailbox and connected. So if I happen to offer Tom, my client, a self-serve or client interface that will show them the data that's in my system, the day after a change, it will be inaccurate until the next merge field comes down. Everybody uses people to run these daily downloads. A bigger brokerage can take multiple hours to run it. You often would prefer to run it when the system is being lightly used. And now some people, us included, have started using a robot to do it. So you've had to otherwise use CapEx expenditure to get a robot to do something that really could be modernized and eliminated.
So, Jeff, do you want to add / modify to what Adam has just said?
Really not much to add. Just the big thing is, as Adam points out, I'll just kind of pontificate or go off on a little tighter tangent on it, is when the data is not mapped properly, what happens is when the fields get downloaded, and if they're not coded correctly, it overwrites data in the BMS or AMS systems. So if I have a perfectly filled out app and I upload and I use straight through processing to the API to upload it. My team has to put it into a portal. When it comes back, sometimes our data gets overwritten. And this is what Steve had called data destruction. IBAC did a lot of work going after certain carriers or vendors, BMS vendors that were worse than others. They were wiping out our data. And therefore, when you go to remarket somebody or make a change, the data is missing. So we had an added cost in looking it up, finding it. People, God forbid, they had any problems with that data not being accurate. So it's like a leaky boat. All of a sudden, one piece of data is gone 1 month, another piece is gone next renewal. Before you know it, you've got 75, 80% of the data. And when you go to do something, when you're running the rate for somebody again, doing a change, that data is missing and you have to go looking for it, which can take time in your system to go back through history of records. So that's one thing. It's an AL3 transaction. The system, Tom, you might know better than me, but back to the 80s with CZO, when they started doing the downloads with the AL3, it basically hasn't really drastically changed that much in terms of getting the data and populating our BMSs with all the coverages, the pricing. And I'll add in that you can do automatic document invoicing, EDI, from the data. Like when our EDIs run, we also run automatic document invoicing so that all our invoicing is done by the system. We are using Quandary, our bot, to do the EDI. We do it at 2 o'clock in the morning when nobody's on the system. It was taking a long time. It has sped up greatly since CZONet finally got their new system in place. It was very slow and cumbersome. The new CZONet seems to be a little bit faster, but it was taking a long time to run that, like sometimes half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour to run it. It's sped up a lot since the upgrade with the system. But just a couple things I wanted to add about the leaky boat and the data and the ADI coming down on it. And again, there's certain things like commercial insurance that you can't send data. They're sending eDocs, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of data mappings on the commercial stuff on the old traditional AL3 way. Hopefully, maybe with XML or JSON, depending on where the future is going to go. I see that CZO is pretty big on JSON right now. Whatever, we'll see what happens in the future with data coming in. And the data, those downloads on the renewal process start most brokers' work. That download comes in, and that's a trigger point to start working on a renewal for some agencies, right? So it's a pretty critical process.
Jeff, I would prefer that we not start down the commercial lines road too much with either eDocs or EDI until personal lines is fixed up. You mentioned data destruction before. That was a bit of a problem 3 or 4 years ago. And for the most part, I think that the vendors and insurers have identified that and cleaned it up. IBAC Tech did a lot of work there too to identify that. So long story short, what was going on is, you could put a piece of information into your BMS, upload it. If the insurer did not have appropriate coding, and they didn't care about that data set, let's say it's just occupation. If they didn't care, but you had entered it, when you got the download, the occupation disappeared. There was there was a way to code that so it wouldn't overwrite. So there's an education format here too, and question about insurers' interface departments and making sure that they know. I don't think that, at least in my experience, whether it's with eDocs or EDI, that anything was done intentionally or nefariously. It's just a matter of not knowing or interpreting the speed limit incorrectly when it wasn't clearly identified.
Yeah, I think this is the same issue. We talk about real-time APIs and how the standards aren't perfect and the implementation is not perfect. eDocs, the standards are not anywhere near perfect and the implementation is not near perfect. EDI is the same thing, right? And unfortunately, in the case of EDI, there's a good chunk of the record that is supposed to be standard, and there's then a built-in portion of the record called the Z codes that was there for future purposes or customization or what have you. And back in the 70s, when technology was not nearly as robust and as flexible as it is today, you had to have some way to be more flexible because it was mainframes, it was the 70s, it was COBOL, it was you had to have a way for future purposes. But now we're stuck with this. Right now, like I've seen brand new implementations of EDI on Guidewire, for example,
full of Z codes,
where they've taken things that are absolutely clearly 100% supposed to go into the first 80% of the record. That is standard. That is what the BMSs are programmed to use, and it's stuck into a Z code, right? Which means now there's extra work for everybody to unparse that. So again, so I have a hard time blaming the EDI standard on this because it was built back in the 70s and you had to be somewhat flexible. But the implementation of it, again, there's no reason to use a Z code when an actual standardized code actually exists. It's just laziness. It's less expensive to shove stuff in there. You don't actually have to do the work to figure out where it should go. And then the broker ends up bearing result of that, because now either the BMS has to charge you more money to parse that, or it ends up in the BMS's version of a memo field, and now you have to throw an RPA or a person at it to go and figure out what the hell's in that code. Right? So it's, all these things are tied to the exact same root causes, and EDI is just another example.
It is amazing when you start tackling all these little tiny things that of themselves aren't deal breakers, but you start piling them all up, and it's millions and millions of dollars getting wasted. It was interesting. I was listening to the IBO phone call on the way in of the principal call, and apparently the government is now focused on two main things: is fraud and consumer choice. And it'd be interesting, to know fraud is a form of waste, right? Because it's not actually modeled for, it's stealing, and this fits into a similar category of like millions of dollars getting wasted and stolen just by sloppiness.
Absolutely.
Sloppiness, lack of investment, lack of priority, all of the above. And I mean, Steve talked about the tangible cost of eDocs. I would hazard a guess that every broker has somebody. I think Jeff alluded to it. I know when I was at BrokerLink, we had a handful of people would come in at 6 a.m. and they'd spend up until noon fixing the download. And there was a handful of people who did nothing other than fix up the screw ups that was coming down the pipe. So you multiply that by 2,000 other brokers, and there's probably millions, tens of millions more money that's being wasted specific to EDI.
I think that the broker channel has to own a little piece of this. Historically, we haven't been organized enough to identify these, we'll call them digital challenges, technological challenges, in a meaningful way as a group to both CSIO and insurers. It's only been, when I joined IBAC Tech like 5 or 6 years ago, there were 2 people who met twice a year, and you're not going to solve anything technologically with 2 meetings a year with 2 people for the broker channel. So I think that the voice has gotten stronger, and bringing things about like identifying data destruction, looking at the costs associated with eDocs, that's pushed down on us is getting stronger, and we're beginning to get heard.
Yeah, I think we need to do a similar thing for EDI that Steve did for eDocs, which is try to quantify what the waste is, as Adam called it. And I suspect that would be a really big number.
We need a champion of this too. Like, I'm sitting here daydreaming over the stupid campaigns that IBAC had. Was it IBAC or IBC? I think it was IBC had running about needing auto reform and comparing Ontario Auto to PEI, which is just asinine lying to social media.
Pretty sure that was IBC.
It was IBC. If you actually want to stimulate change, of which they don't have the owners that want to change it, but it's like, I guess it does fall on IBAC. Like, getting on a campaign that's pretty loud and vocal on, hey, dear government, industry, public, and everyone, you want to find waste? Here's millions of dollars we would love to stop spending your premiums on.
I personally would be embarrassed talking about how our 1974 technology just still doesn't work properly.
To a government?
To any and all who would read my social media post, because I'm not sure that would make my customers thrilled, nor do I think it would make the government thrilled. So while I think there needs to be a heck of a lot more sunlight disinfecting this particular problem, I'm not sure all of the sunlight is the best move, personally.
Well, I mean, we've said on the show a bunch of times, I think that the broker channel has maintained its personal lines market share despite itself thus far. And if we want it back, we have to be more efficient. We have to have a better experience. And it's going to take fixing stuff like this. That's 1980s, 90s, whatever.
That 1970s technology, like the banks still run on a lot of this older tech too, right? And because, that mainframe stuff is so strong and so robust if it's done properly. And, when you're moving millions and millions and millions of policies, from carriers to brokers every day, you need something big and strong to do it. The problem is it's leaky, and we need to fix those leaks. And there's millions of dollars of benefit and customer experience benefits and so on that come out of that. So yeah, I think brokers and associations need to get active, like has happened with eDocs, and now we're seeing some good outcomes for eDocs.
Mission 1 is eDocs, right? And it's probably there's so much of it, and it's probably the easiest thing to fix right now that has the greatest return. I'm super, as a broker on the board, and I think the IBAC Tech Committee, it was important for us to try and get that term or similar governance introduced to that organization, because that was the thing that was missing. Personally, and this isn't, a view as a board member, I'd like to see the standards, whether it's EDI, eDoc, or APIs, robust enough that if you don't follow them, it doesn't work. Like, you will not be able to get your eDoc, your EDI through, or anything else if you're not meeting the standards. Any variance means it won't get there. The package will not be delivered. That's a true end state of standards, right?
That is the ultimate. If it doesn't fit,
yes,
then it doesn't go through. Right? That is the ultimate. That's because right now the feedback is a very long, torturous loop that has many people pointing fingers at each other. But if your feedback is, "Hey, my file didn't transmit," yeah, that's immediate. I'd have to do something about that right now.
That's right.
I think we beat up the EDI eDocs pretty well for another year. It seems to be a yearly occurrence. Someday I hope we're not talking about it, right? But if you look at the English language, it's changed a little bit since the days of Shakespeare, but some of the basics are still there, right? It keeps evolving. We got to keep evolving ourselves, right? And clarity's key, clarity's king. And it's good to see people are actually talking about what does this actually mean and getting clear. And it's good to see enforcements,
If there's any brokers listening that ever have the opportunity to be on an insurance company's advisory council or have the opportunity to give them feedback, we should all be asking the question, number one, when are you going to be CSIO compliant? Because you're not. And number two is the big one. What is your date, or what does your roadmap look like for sunsetting your portal? When is that going to happen? Do you even have a roadmap or a plan to eventually sunset that portal?
Isn't Hope a plan?
As always, big shout out to our sponsor, IFS Premium Finance. Thank you very much, guys. And to the Excalibur Read to Ride program, our charity partner. Thank you very much.
Is retention important to your brokerage? Of course it is. That's why at IFS, we have a cancellation prevention process. Want more details? Give us a call. I know you don't always use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.